Okay, sorry for the intermission. This is part 2 of forensic anthropology. So we're looking at this bone here, and let me move my picture out of the way so you can see. The question is, how old would you age this person? And if you go back to the last slide and we look at what we said, oh, sorry, that's not the last slide. It says that when there's no more growth in the bone, it's complete by the mid 20s, right? So typically you're done growing by mid 20s. We used to think it was earlier than that, like 18, but now doctors have realized that typically, especially guys, will grow into their early mid 20s. So would you say that this person who owns this bone is older than 20 years old or younger? You can see that there's a space in between here. So this is definitely younger than mid 20s. Okay, so that's how you're going to look at that. Okay, same type thing with these x-rays. These ages are just telling you like when things fuse. So your first thing to fuse, you can see here that I have on here is the elbow, like pictures here. And we're going to be able to, like I might say to you, the epiphysis on the femur is fused and it'll say what age. And then you're going to figure out like what age that person is based on what different bones have fused. All right, just as a reminder, what bones make your elbow? Okay, so your elbow is here. So what are the two bones? It's just like when we were figuring out if we're talking about these two front bones, that's what I'm talking about. Like not, we can talk about this too. So this is the humerus, but if we talk about these two, what makes the elbow? It's the radius and the ulna, right? So the front is the radius and the ulna, and then this is the humerus. Okay. And you can just see, I don't need to talk to you about this, but you can look at the chart and see when things actually fuse and you're done growing. Okay. So this is absolutely amazing that you can determine how old somebody is from looking at the pubic symphysis. So we're looking at one of the things. So here's a pelvis here. You can look at the one that you got in the mail. And the pubic symphysis, you can see in the picture here, they're pointing at the pubic symphysis area. So yours will have a piece of cartilage in there. And that cartilage is to make it so that they're not rubbing against each other. Because imagine if you didn't have that cartilage there, bone would be rubbing on bone every time you walked. It'd be awful. But what they found is there's a very predictable wear and tear of this pubic symphysis. And here it is. I'm serious. It's crazy. They literally have molds of these things. So if you get a pelvis, you can figure out the age from that. Now, do these things change with some certain wear and tear? Yes. For example, if you're a long distance runner, or if you walk a lot every day, or more than the average person, you're going to age up. So let's say you're in the 19 to 35 age, you might age up into the 22 to 43. It'll just depend. But it's very interesting how literally they can predict what the pattern is going to be on the inside of these from the wear and tear. Okay, so that's one way we can age. The other way we can age a person is looking at the ribs. So as crazy as it is, these edge of the ribs here will start to get frayed looking. And that will indicate that the person is, older. Typically starting in 40s and stuff like that, they'll start to fray. Hips and knees, you guys know this. You know people, older people, and maybe some younger people that have had a lot of wear and tear on their knees. So they've had to have knee replacements or hip replacements. And again, hip replacement seems to be a lot older than knee replacement, but it's also something that happens. You might know people that have had that happen. So again, goes along with aging and wear and tear. How much do you have? And also, are you something like a catcher where you really use your knees or something like that? Or, so that's the type of thing you have to think about. Why is it not switching my slide? There it goes. Okay. Stature determination. We're going to do this with our bones. And again, you always have to report an age. You do not want to say this person is 5 feet tall. You want to give a range for that. So the most accurate way is to figure out what race the person is, or at least their dominant race, and then go from there. So I would say, obviously, my dominant race is Caucasoid, and I would use the female equation. So if I was measuring my femur, I would use that top right equation here to figure out what my projected height is based on my femur. Now, have you ever seen people where they sitting down, they look tall, and when they stand up, they look short? Yeah, that's me. So that means that I must have a longer torso versus my shorter legs, which is definitely a thing. Okay. So keep that in mind that there's still some abnormalities even when you're looking at these formulas. And these formulas actually, based on like the region of where you live, they could be adjusted as well. We're just going to use this table because we're not going to be crazy and use lots of different ones. I will tell you this. So when you're looking at height determination, the best height determination comes from the long bones. So the long bones that we really want to look at, that we really care about, are what? What will give us the best height determination? So I would say the best combination, the femur is the biggest long bone, right? That's the major one. If you have the femur and the tibia, that would be good because that would give us the whole leg region. And then also another combination that would work would be the femur and the humerus, because the humerus can kind of give us along here. Because I don't know if you guys know this, but the length from your like your elbow to your shoulder, that's how big your foot is. You can actually put your foot in that area and it fits. It doesn't look like it, but if you put your hand up, like this and put your foot in there, it really does fit. It's crazy. So that does help be able to see that. Okay, so sex determination. We're looking at the pelvis. The big thing is this angle right here. It's called the subpubic angle. So here's one pelvis, and here's another pelvis. Okay, and as you're looking at these, and you're looking at that subpubic angle, which of them looks like it has a wider angle? Obviously, this one, right? Wider angle, definitely. What is that wider angle used for? For childbirth. So women have to be able to have that wider angle to have a child come out of there. And a lot of times that the age in life that's tricky when you get a pelvis that's not somebody that's hit puberty yet, right? And so their pelvis hasn't like expanded. If it's a woman, they're going to expand. Whereas see how the males look narrow and the females definitely look a little wider. Like it's hard to stack them up, but you can see definitely. Okay. This is also, I think this is actually a child too, so it's harder to look at. But let's take a look at this. So again, so this is the male. It has a smaller opening. The other thing I want you to notice is, do you see how the tailbone curves up a lot? Well, that's also going to be a problem because this is the birth canal. So if a child's head's hitting that, that's going to be a problem. Whereas if we look at the female one, let me get it the right angle because at some angles it does look like it's curved a lot. Well, this one kind of does, but you might look at yours. When you look at it head on like this and put it flat, and you see this one, the actual thing doesn't get in the way very much. But if I look at this one head on flat, and it's actually flat, it does get in the way. So again, you have to look at it in the right angle to see that. The other thing that is going to indicate whether a male or female, again, like I said, is the wider hips is going to be a female, and this is the male, but I'm just showing like where the iliac crest are these guys. So these are wider in female and more narrow in males. And then the opening, right? So the heart shape opening is going to be male because it's not going to. This looks more like a heart when you look through it, whereas if you look through the female, it's more of a round opening. Okay, so determination of skull. Guys always freak out when I tell them this, but when we look at these skulls, I'm going to show you. I have 4 over here, okay, on this table. So here's the 4 skulls. I want you to take a look at them. See if you can tell just by looking at them which one is. If there's only one that's female, which one's female? So I think it's kind of hard to tell just by looking at them here. The easiest telltale sign is when you pick up the skull and you look at the back of it. So when you feel this edge right here, it's called the occipital protuberance. And you can see a little bit from the side, but you see how that kind of looks smooth? Now let me show you the difference of one. It's going to look a lot different. Okay. You see how this is, it's hard to tell in here, but this is not smooth. There is a major bump right there. I want you guys to feel your back of your head right now. Do you feel a bump in the back? Towards the bottom, like where the bottom of your hat would sit. And girls, you feel yours too. And guys, if you're in the same room with a girl, you guys should feel each other's heads to feel the difference. I know it's awkward, but it's really cool to see it. Like this is an obvious bump here. Like you can see it sticking out right there. Okay. Whereas this lady here doesn't have much of a bump at all. Okay. She's very smooth if I feel it. Like, yes, there's a little tiny one. And what is the difference for that? Why do you guys think that they would be different? Okay, well, males have they say there's a lot more muscles in the back of their neck than a female, and that's where the muscles attach. And that muscle attachment makes their skull have that big piece of bone there, and it gets bigger. So again, could you have a female with a bump there? Sure, it's not going to be as big as a male's. Although maybe a female bodybuilder, possibly, because they're lifting a lot and have um, a lot more muscles there. Another thing that's very common with a guy is what's called the brow ridge. So when we're looking at the skull, you can see it in this one right here. And you can see it in some people. Like when I'm at the airport, this is so weird, but I like to look at people and I can tell, like, oh, if I found their skull in the woods, I could tell that they're male because their brow ridge is very prominent. Like this guy right here, I can feel it very prominent. It's obvious, almost like Frankenstein. You can see that. Whereas a woman's skull is going to be smooth there. Okay. The other thing that I think is really hard to tell with the male and female is the mandible shape. Okay, so let me show the correct direction. So the mandible shape here. Actually, this one's easy to tell. Okay, so you can see here it says the U shape is the male and the more V shape is the female. And this one's definitely more V. See that? And this one's definitely more U. Now, how hard would this to be if you're looking at just one skull? A lot harder, right? That's why you might want to, when you're doing this lab, you might want to compare with another group, or you might want to ask me, be like, can you look at our skull and show us a male or a female so we can see the difference? Because if I'm looking at these side by side, I can tell that this is definitely more V shaped and this is more U shaped. But if I'm just looking at it by itself, I might think this is a V. You see what I'm saying? So that's why people that are forensic anthropologists, they are, um, they've been doing this for a long time. And it's a lot easier because they're used to doing it. Okay. Also, the other thing they look at is like the forehead sloping, which again, I think is another hard thing to look at. But in general, the female will have a smaller sloping forehead, whereas the male, which you could tell in this one, the male has a longer, let me show you. Yeah, it's hard to tell. A longer sloping forehead. Again, it's easier when I'm looking at them side by side here, and maybe you can see, but like the longer sloping. The other thing you're supposed to look at too is, in general, the size of the skull should be smaller for a female. Like it should be less robust, more gracile, like smaller features. And again, it's hard. Like it takes some practice determining like, what's what. It's very hard to tell um, which ones go with what. And it takes a lot of practice. And I still get them wrong sometimes too. So don't feel bad if it's hard. The race is probably the hardest. So again, in forensic anthropology, these are the three races they use. And I remember somebody last class was like, oh, that's racist. It's not. This is just how they classify. They've just used this classification system. And they say that when you're figuring out the race of somebody, again, it's the dominant race. So you might be a mix of lots of different things, but what's the dominant race based on what your bones say? That's all. Okay, so let me show you some features that you would have here. So this is a European female. So things that we're supposed to look for are the nasal aperture, right? So this is this opening here, and it's supposed to be fairly narrow. Whereas if I'm looking at a negroid, to show you the negroid, I think is this one. Yes, let me show you the difference. So again, it's still a male and female, but still, look at the difference here. Do you see? It's so hard to hold them level. Okay, all right, so there. So look at them there. Do you see how this one has a wider nose than this one? This is the European and this is the negroid. So again, you might want to zoom in, but you can see like that's what they're talking about, the nasal aperture, and that's something you're going to measure on your skull that I sent you. Okay. The other thing that's really interesting on the negroid is what's called prognathism. So prognathism is when I look at this skull, and it's hard because I'm holding this mandible on here. If I put a pencil right here, is it going to jut out or does it go straight down? Okay. This one has a very large like shelf here where it goes out. Okay. So therefore, that's what indicates to me it's more negroid. Whereas one that doesn't will go straight down. So prognathism is when that this part under your nose kind of sticks out a little bit. Okay. That's all I want to look at with that. What I think is the hardest is the shape of the eye orbits. So again, it said, so this was our European right here, and this was our Negroid. Okay. So let's take a look at this. Now, what shape do you think these eye orbits are? So it says for Negroid, they're square. These ones actually do look square. And then it says for Caucasoids, these are supposed to be oval. Now, I have a hard time telling between them. Like you tell me these are square, I do see the square, but are these oval? It's hard for me to tell. So again, unless you have them side by side, it's tough to tell. So here's what I'm going to tell you. For your lab, I really want you to go by the stuff that's quantitative, the stuff that you can get numbers for. Like when you're measuring the nasal index, when you are measuring the length of the femur, those are the things that I want you to go by specifically to figure out if it's a male or female or the height of the person. These things are harder to tell, so you might be wrong on them. Okay, I still want you to say what you think, but again, when it comes down to it, go by the things that are quantitative, not qualitative. Okay, so again, we've already talked about this, but the best bone in general to figure out, like if you get a pelvis, you can definitely tell if it's a male or female, the skeleton. Okay, and so you can see what the angle we're looking at here. So if the angle is less than, well, here it's male, it's 50 to 60, but they give a different range on your thing that you're going to see. But still, wider angle is going to be female. That's the bottom line. Okay. All right. Here's a silly of a dinosaur bone. He's got a dinosaur femur there. So this is just a cool thing because it's obviously it's the best to figure out the height of a person if you have all long bones, um, and all the bones in general to get the height. But if you just have at least some of the long bones, that's fine. Um, the physiounions are what we talked about with the age. So if I have a long bone here, like a femur, and I see if it's fused or not, then I can tell about the age. So you can see it tells you on the chart here, like at what age these things fuse, and be able to look at that. But on your lab, you'll have a chart you can look at too. The skull, if I'm looking at the skull, they tell me the race the best. There's not really, except for the long bones, if you can put a long bone on the table, let me just show you this table. Let me see. So if I put that long bone on the table, and oops, and I can get my hand under it, that's a certain type of race. So that is Caucasian if I can get my hand underneath it. All right. And I have to be able to get my whole hand under it. So if you can't get your whole hand under it, that would not count. That's about the only thing besides the skull that tell us race. Otherwise, the pelvis, the other long bones are not going to tell us race. So the skull does a nice job by looking at the nasal index, the shape of the eye orbits, those different things. Again, I think it's really hard to tell the shape of the eye orbits, but here's a picture you can see. Okay, so one thing I want you to remember is, unless you have the whole skeleton, it's hard to be really accurate. But even without that, we can we can kind of give an estimate. Usually, what they're doing is they're trying to match somebody to an identification, like it's a missing person. So I know what the person looks like. Do the bones match, right? And so in yours, you're not going to do that. You're actually figuring out, is it a male or female? What race is this person probably? Um, Again, looking at the bones in general can tell you if it's male or female. Like, are they robust or are they gracile and like thin bones? Um, Here, this picture is what I was talking about. It's the Peruvian people. Actually, I think I said it wrong earlier, but I just remembered. The Peruvian people used to wrap their heads and make them. Their skulls would form into these crazy shapes, and these are real ones here that were found. And so that's what I'm talking about when the forensic anthropologists to keep the data of the what's it called? Anthropological data, like history. That's like another one of their jobs. Okay, so before our class next time, I just need you to answer the Module 4 study questions, which can be easily answered by what you saw here and then also reading the module, the different modules that I posted. And then please, next time, make sure you bring all the bones I gave you to class because we're going to do the lab, the calipers to measure, that's like that sliding thing, and then the measuring tape. Okay, you definitely need all those things. Okay? All right, I'll see you guys later.